영어 원서 읽기 500번 읽기 도전 3독제. 오전에 챕터 1부터 4까지 읽었고 이제 5부터 9까지 읽어볼 차례입니다. 굉장히 무모한 도전이기도 한데 어휘들이 어떻게, 왜, 그리고 그 어휘들이 가지는 뉘앙스가 어떤 것인지 500번 읽기를 하면 알 수 있다고 하니까 저도 한번 도전을 하는 거고, 또 500번 읽기를 했을 때 제가 똑같은 영어를 대하더라도 어떤 느낌을 갖게 되는지 저도 궁금하고 알고 싶기 때문에 지금 조금 무모하지만 도전을 하고 있습니다. 자, 지금 3독제에서 어떤 변화가 크게 느껴진다라고 말하기는 어렵지만 읽기는 좀 편해진 건 사실이에요. 그래서 남아있는 부분들 어쨌든 무모하지만 도전해 보도록 하겠습니다. 지금 읽기는 섀도우 리딩으로, 오전에 섀도우 리딩으로 했었기 때문에 섀도우 리딩으로 한번 도전해 보도록 하겠습니다. 자, Chapter 5. Chester goes into his act. The next morning I was awakened by a scream. Robert, come down here right away. There's something wrong in the kitchen. For a moment, panic seized me. I thought I should run out of dog food. But then I remembered the events of the previous evening. Mr. Monroe came bounding down the stairs. Chester, I cried. Did you see Mr. Monroe? His face has turned white. It's Bunnicula, isn't it? No, he said calmly. It's a shaving cream, you idiot. By now, the excitement in the kitchen was at full throttle. The table was covered with Bunnicula's handiwork. There were white beans and white peas and white squash and white tomatoes and white lettuce and white zucchini. What can it mean, Robert? Mrs. Monroe was saying. I'm getting worried. One tomato is a curiosity, but this is unheard of. There must be something wrong with our refrigerator. That's it. It's turning all the vegetables white. But look, she said. I left these tomatoes on the windowsill and they are white too. And this squash I left in the bowl on the table. At that moment, Pete and Toby came into the kitchen. Holy cow, what's going on? Hey, maybe it's a vegetable blight, Mom. Could that be, Robert? Did you ever hear of anything like that? Well, no, actually, that is. I've heard of a blight, but nothing like this. Chester leaned my way. This would take forever if we leave it up to them. Sometimes human beings can be so slow. I started to answer him, but he was heading for the table. What about the friends of yours in the agriculture department, old Tom Cregan? Could we call him and ask him if we were doing something wrong? It's a DDT, Mom, Peter interjected. I know about this stuff. It's because you buy vegetables that aren't organic. All vegetables are organic, Peter, Mrs. Monroe replied. That's not what my teacher says. See, Toby, I told you this would happen. They are using chemicals on our food, and if you're not careful, you'll turn white too. Like Dad? Robert, couldn't you take that shaving cream off your face? Oh, yes, of course. Where's my towel? I know I brought it down with me. For that moment, where was Chester? I'd seen him going toward the table, but I'd lost track of him listening to all the talk about DDT. I just hope that they didn't use any of the stuff where they grew chocolate cupcakes. Pete, did you take my towel? Why would I take your towel, Dad? I don't shave. Just then the door swung open. I could not believe my eyes. There was Chester with Mr. Monroe's towel draped across his back and tied under his neck like a cape. That was strange enough. But on his face was an expression that sent chills down on my spine. His eyes were wide and staring. The corners of his mouth was pulled back in an evil grimace. His teeth were bared and gleaming in the morning light. He cackled menacingly and threw back his head as if he were laughing at all of us. I thought he'd completely lost his mind. There's my towel. What's the matter, Chester? Were you cold? Mr. Monroe bent down to take the towel from Chester. Before he could lay his hands on it, Chester flipped over onto his back, closed his eyes, and folded his paws over his chest. It was a hideous sight. He opened his eyes wide. With paws outstretched, he slowly lifted his head. His eyes glazed and vacant. Soon the upper half of his body followed, all in one smooth follow, until he was in a sitting position. "Hey, Dad, did you leave your brandy glass out last night? Chester is acting a little weird. Well, son, cats are funny creatures." I glanced at Chester. He wasn't laughing. "Psst, Chester, what are you up to?" "I'm a vampire, you dolt. Can't you tell? I'm trying to warn them." "Well, it's not working. You'd better think of something else." Chester frowned, apparently deep in thought. "So, you see, Toby," Mr. Monroe was explaining, "all cats are as individual as all people. Maybe he just wants to get our attention. Isn't that right, kitty cat?" Ordinarily, Chester would have left the room upon being called kitty cat, but he was lost in thought. "Come on, Chester, give me back my towel." Mr. Monroe moved toward Chester. Chester's eyes lit up. He looked at me and smiled. I sensed I was not going to like what he had in mind. I was toying with the notion of slinking under the table when Chester fixed me with his eyes. How deep they were, like black pools. I felt myself floating, lost in them, my will no longer my own. I felt an inexplicable urge to murmur, "Yes, master," when he walked slowly, steadily toward me. As it drew nearer, I found myself unable to move. He stopped before me, never taking his gaze from me, and lunged. "Yo! Mom!" Chester bit Harold on the neck. That wasn't a real bite. Was it, Chester? That was a love bite. Isn't that cute? Love bite my foot. That hurt. Chester, what's the matter with you? I sputtered. Do I look like a tomato? Oh, it doesn't matter anyway, Harold. They don't understand. How can human beings read the same books I do and still be so thick? Our conversation was interrupted. Mrs. Monroe picked Chester up and cuddled him. I was praying she would not add insult to injury by kissing his nose, which he hates more than anything. Poor Chester, do you need a little love? Do you know what I'm gonna do, you big ball of fuzz, you? I could tell what was coming. I'm going to kiss you on your little nose. Yup, I could tell that was coming all right. Chester knew better than to resist. He went limping in Mrs. Monroe's arms. Mr. Monroe took his towel off Chester. I still don't know why he's wearing my towel, he said. I think he must be cold, dear. Here's your towel. Why don't you get this kitty sweater? Chester looked ill, and he can wear that all day. As Chester was being buttoned into his bright yellow sweater, with a little purple mice and cowboy hats all over it, Mr. Monroe said, "What about those vegetables? Should I speak to Tom Cregan?" "Yes, dear," Mrs. Monroe said. "Why don't you? I'm sure there's some explanation. In the meantime, I'll change market. To tell you the truth, I'm really much more worried about Chester. We'd better keep our eye on him." Chester and I did not speak until late afternoon. I was busy nursing my neck, and Chester was busy hiding under the sofa, too embarrassed to be seen. When we did speak at last, it was a brief exchange. "Hey, Chester," I called when he finally crawled out from under. "We don't have to worry about any vampire bunnies anymore. All you have to do is stand outside his cage in that sweater, and he will laugh himself to death." Chester was not amused. "That's right, make fun, all of you. No one understands. I tried to warn them, and they wouldn't heed. Now I'm going to take matters into my own hand." Whereupon Chester and his 16 purple mice went into the kitchen for dinner. Chapter 6. Harold Helps Out. That night I had an uneasy sleep. Strange noises emanated from downstairs. It sounded like toenails were clicking back and forth on the floor. It must be Bunnicula making his midnight run, I thought, although I had never known him to make a sound. And I smelled the funniest odor in the air, something familiar, though I couldn't place it. As the night progressed, it grew stronger and stronger, until finally it tickled my nose, and I sneezed myself awake. I jumped up Toby's bed, still sniffling, and headed down the stairs for the living room to find Chester to see if he could smell it too. The odor grew even stronger as I approached the living room. Standing in the doorway was Chester, a strange pendant hanging from his neck. "Phew, Chester," I said. "What are you wearing that awful thing for? It smells." "Of course it smells," he replied. "Here, I made one for you too. Put it on." "Are you kidding? That thing smells like a garlic." "It is garlic," Chester stated matter-of-factly. "Why are you wearing garlic?" I asked, thinking that by this time Chester was capable of anything. As we walked into the living room, I tripped on another piece of garlic lying in the doorway. "Careful," said Chester. "Watch your step." I surveyed the room and saw that it was strewn with garlic on the doorways, over the windows, and around Bunnicula's cage. The poor little fellow had buried his nose as far as possible under his blanket. I was about to follow his example and return to Toby's bed to bury my nose under the blanket when Chester grabbed my tail with hesitation. "You're not leaving this room until you put this on," he grumbled at me. I think that's what he said. I wasn't sure because he had my tail in his mouth. "It's not polite to talk with your mouth full, Chester. Drop that tail." Meanwhile, my eyes were beginning to water. "Listen," Chester snapped at me, fortunately letting go of my tail first. "The book said to use garlic." "What book?" I asked. "The Joy of Cooking?" Chester continued. "The mark of the vampire says garlic renders the vampires immobile." "What does that mean?" "It means they can't go anywhere if there's garlic around." "Well, I've got news for you, Chester. I can't go anywhere either. The smell is killing me, but you've got to put it on. It says so in the book. If you don't put it on, I will put it on for you." "No, Chester," I said as my nose suddenly and involuntarily closed. "I'm leaving this room right now." And I did. I was so sick to my stomach from the aroma that I decided to spend the early morning hours outdoors. As dawn approached, it seemed that it would be a peaceful day. The sky was clear, the birds were singing, and I felt contented after my difficult night just to be lying in the grass, feeling the ladybugs curl up my ears. Suddenly, the calm was broken. Strange, piercing screams came from the area of the kitchen. "Not again," I thought. Watch it turned white now. As it happened, it was Chester. There in the sink, lathered with soap, was the feline detective. Yelling his head up, Mrs. Murner was scrubbing him vigorously, and from the sound of her voice was in the middle of a long lecture. "I don't know what's gotten into you, Chester. You never played with garlic before. I thought you hated the smell of it, and here you've gotten it all over yourself. Stop wiggling. You will get soap in your eyes. If you want to chew on something, I will get you some catnip. But stay out of my herbs." Then she rinsed him off, rubbed him with a towel, and plunked him down in front of the stove to finish drying. "Shut the door," he hissed at me. "I'm freezing." The silly woman. Doesn't she know cats don't get bath? "What do you mean? I get bath all the time," I said, closing the door with my back foot. "That's because you're too dumb to bathe yourself. Cats always bathe themselves. It's a rule. Everyone knows that." "Well, at least it smells nice in here again," I sniffed as I settled down next to Chester by that stove. "And it's all toasty warm here in the kitchen." "Sure, it smells nice again," he said. "But now the house isn't safe anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked, getting closer. "I mean it worked last night. The garlic worked. No more vegetables turned white, did they?" "No, but that means Bunnicula didn't get out of his cage last night. Maybe he was just tired," I said, "or maybe he was full." "Don't be ridiculous," he replied. It was the garlic he couldn't leave his cage, but tonight he'll be free to roam again, and I've got to find a way to stop him that isn't smelly. Mr. and Mrs. Muller were hurrying in and out of the room, stepping over us, late for the work. Mrs. Muller yelled up to Toby, "Don't forget to take the steak out of the freezer when you get home today, Toby, and leave it on the table to defrost. And this time, remember to put a plate under it." Chester's ears perked up. "Of course," he said, "that's what I'll do," and he strolled past me with a knowing smile. Mrs. Muller turned off the stove and left the room. It was too much for me to figure out, so I went to sleep on the nice, warm kitchen floor. I was awakened by a bite on the ear. Chester was sitting by me looking very impatient. "Boy, nothing wakes you up," he said. "I've been yelling and poking at you for 10 minutes. "I was dreaming," I answered defensively, "about a place where there weren't any cats around to bother nice dogs and wake them up when they needed their rest. You can finish sleeping later," he said crisply. "Right now, you have to help me." "Do what?" I asked. "Get Bunnicula out of the cage." I sprang back. "Get him out of the cage? I thought that was what you didn't want. I thought you said he was dangerous. What if he attacks me?" "Aren't you ashamed?" Chester replied. "Afraid of a harmless little bunny?" "Harmless? I thought you said he was a threat to his house and everyone in it. Isn't that what you said? Isn't that what we've been talking about all this time? He's a treat, but only at night. During the day, he's just a very sleepy rabbit. And that's why we have to do it now, while the sun is still up. Follow me," he said. "There isn't much time. Toby stayed down here forever, and the others will be home soon, but you must have been tired, Harold. You slept through lunch." I followed Chester into the living room. My heart was pounding as he unlocked the cage door with his paw. It looked as if he'd had years of experience opening locks. The door swung open. Bunnicula was sleeping peacefully. He did, however, look a little green around the gills, probably from the garlic. I was just wondering how a rabbit could have gills when Chester said, "Okay, Harold, do your stop while I get what I need from the kitchen." "Well, what do you want me to do? I can't read your mind." "Get him out of the cage and onto the floor, and I will be right back," Chester said. What? I verbalized. "How am I supposed to do that?" "Use your head," he answered, and he was gone. Looking at the cage, I realized that was precisely what I would have to do. Until this moment, I had never had to face the possibility of actual physical contact with a real rabbit. I looked up at my children reluctantly. I seemed to recall my grandfather telling me that one picked a rabbit up by its neck with one's teeth. This I attempted through the very idea set my stomach churning. I squeezed my head through the tiny door and gently placed my teeth around the skin of a bunny's neck. To avoid any suggestion of violence, I've never been one for the sports of hunting. I preferred to think of myself as the creature's mother, carrying it up to safety. Unfortunately, I couldn't carry it anywhere, for once my head was in the cage, it wouldn't come out again. I could go neither forward nor backward. At that moment, Chester appeared at the door, carrying in his mouth what looked every bit like a nice, big, juicy raw steak. My eyes popped, my teeth dropped Bunnicula, and I began to drool. After all, I had missed the lunch. "Chester, what are you doing with that steak?" "Haven't you gotten him out of there yet?" "I can't get either of us out of here. My head is stuck." "Oh, Harold, sometimes I despair. Here, I'll get you both out." I should have done everything myself. He came over, dropped the stick just a few feet away from me, and climbed over my shoulders. "You pull your head out while I pushed against the cage." "Who gets the steak?" I asked. "Don't worry about the steak, Harold. Just pull." "I would have more motivation if I knew who is to get the steak." Chester ignored me. I pulled. He pushed. I felt something go pop. We all fell in a jumble. chattered the cage, Bunnicula, and me. When I looked around, Bunnicula was lying next to me, still sound asleep. There you are, I said. We got him out. Now let's eat. No dice, Chatter said. Just read this to me so I would be sure I'm doing it right. And he handed me a book. That book again. Start at the top of the page, Chatter said, as he picked up the steak. Why don't you read and I will hold the steak? Chatter replied. I took it to mean that I was to start reading. To destroy the vampire and his reign of terror, it is necessary to pound a sharp steak. Chatter interrupted. A sharp steak? He asked. What does that mean? I'll taste it and tell you if it's sharp, I offered. Oh, never mind. This will do. It's a sirloin. Keep reading. To pound a sharp stick into the vampire's heart. This must be done during the daylight hours, when the vampire has no powers. Okay, he said. This is it. I'm sorry I had to go this far, but if they'd listened, this wouldn't have been necessary. He dragged the stake across the floor and laid it across the inert body. Then, with his paws, he began to hit the stake. Are you sure this is what they mean, Chester? Am I anywhere near his hurt? He asked. It's hard to tell. I said, all I can really see are his nose and his ears. You know, he's really sort of cute. Chester was getting that glint on his eyes again. He was pounding away at the stake harder and harder. Be careful, I cried. It was hurting. Chester increased his attack. I was really getting worried when the door opened and Mr. and Mrs. Monroe were suddenly with us in the room. Chester, Mrs. Monroe screamed, what are you doing with my dinner? Robert, get the steak away from Chester. And what's the matter with Bunnicula? Why is he on the floor? Mr. Monroe took the beautiful steak away. I wished it had fallen farewell with tears in my eyes. As the kitchen door swung open, Chester whispered with cold determination, all right, the last resort, and dashed into the kitchen. Seconds later, he was back carrying his water dish between his teeth. He ran toward the Bunnicula and with a mad yell threw the dish of water at the rabbit. Unfortunately, he was so hysterical that his aim was not the best. With the water dripping from my ears, I watched Mr. Monroe. Mrs. Monroe picked Chester up by the scruff of his neck and tossed him unceremoniously out the front door. Robert, we are going to have to do something about the cat. Look at this mess. Dinner's ruined. The poor bunny is out of his cage, and Harold is just sopping wet. I tried to look as pathetic as I knew how. Poor Harold, Mrs. Monroe cooed as she dragged me off. You've had a rough day, you and Bunnicula. I don't know what's the matter with your friend, but unless he learns how to behave, he will just have to spend the night outside. Mrs. Monroe, meanwhile, had restored Bunnicula to his cage and the cage to windowsill. I couldn't believe it when I saw the Bunnicula was still asleep. And Mr. Monroe said, the steak is ruined. Why don't we let Harold have it? He deserved a treat anyway, don't you, old boy? I panted appropriately. After my delicious dinner, I turned my attention to the bug still lying open on the floor. Another method of destroying the vampire is to immerse the body in water. The body will then shrivel and disappear, and the vampire emits one last scream of terror. Phew, I thought, so that's what he was trying to do. Thank goodness he missed. I had no regrets about missing a scene like that. Poor Bunnicula. I looked over toward the cage, and there on the other side of the window was a pathetic tabby face looking in. His little nose was pressed against the window. I couldn't hear him, but from the movement of his lips, I could see he was very unhappy. Poor Chester. As for me, Mrs. Monroe spent the evening patting me, and the family chatted with me all night long. And of course, I'd had my yummy steak dinner. So, it wasn't such a bad day after all. Except that now my steak was all gone. Poor Harold. Chapter 7. a new friend in need. In the days that followed, Chester's behavior was exemplary. He purred and he cooed and he cleaned his paws, and he rubbed up against everyone's legs to show what a good boy he was. I was getting worried. Chester acts that way only when he has something devious in the back of his mind, but I didn't know what it was. He had tried everything in the book to get rid of vampires, and all his efforts had failed. But I knew from the expression on his face that something was definitely up. Of course, I didn't know for certain, because he had not spoken to me since his steak incident. I guess he realized that my hurt just wasn't in the destruction of the bunny vampire. In fact, I was beginning to like the little fellow. The Monroes were relieved by Chester's improved behavior. They didn't know how to account for his strange doing, but to their credit, they were willing to let bygones and be bygones. The only disturbing factor in all our lives was the reappearance of the white vegetables each morning in the kitchen, and yet after a few days, even they stopped and the life seemed to return to normal. One evening, I dropped by Bunnicula's cage to chat. I had found myself doing that more and more since Chester had stopped talking to me. Of course, Bunnicula didn't talk back, but he was a good listener. I had begun to think of him as a friend, a strange one, granted, but one can't always choose one's friend. I was distressed this particular evening to see that what he was dragging his ears, as it were. He looked tired and listless. I felt his nose, and it seemed a little warmer than it should have been. I became alarmed. I ran over to Toby, who was doing a picture puzzle on the floor, and began to bark. Something I do only in cases of extreme emergency, since even I do not care for the sound. "What's the matter, Harold?" Toby asked without moving. "Are there burglars?" I ran to the cage and looked at Bunnicula. I looked back at Toby and whimpered. Toby just looked confused. "Do you want to play with Bunnicula? Shall I take him out of the cage?" "Woof," I responded, indicating I hoped that was indeed what he should do. "I'll ask Mom and Dad, Harold. You wait here." He was back in a minute, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, Harold, but Mom said you can't play with the rabbit. It causes too much commotion." I looked down at the floor and whimpered again. "Sorry, Harold. Maybe later, when we are all in here together." I regarded Bunnicula, whose eyes met mine. He gave a little shudder, and I felt like crying. My friend was sick, and I didn't know what to do. I wished that I could tell Chester, but I knew it was no use. He was just too mad at me. I would have to sort this one out on my own. That night, I couldn't sleep worrying about Bunnicula. I decided to go downstairs and check on his condition. What I saw when I entered the living room horrified me. Bunnicula was out of his cage on the floor, while Chester stood in front of him, a piece of garlic around his neck and his arms outstretched, blocking the kitchen door. Suddenly, it all fell into place. Chester was starving Bunnicula. Of course, that's why he seemed so listless, and that's why the vegetable had stopped turning white. Chester had made it impossible for Bunnicula to eat. "Chester!" I cried. Chester jumped a very high jump. "What are you doing down here?" He spat at me as he landed. "I know what you're doing, Chester, and the jig is up. The little bunny never hurt anybody. All he's doing is eating his own way. What do you care if he drains a few vegetables?" "He's a vampire," Chester snarled. "Today vegetables, tomorrow the world." "I think perhaps you're overstating your case," I suggested cautiously. "Go back to bed, Harold. This is larger than the two of us. It may seem harsh, but I'm only being cruel to be kind." Who's he being kind to? I wondered as I went back upstairs. The tomatoes and the zucchinis of the world? Maybe a few cabbages? It just didn't make sense. But I could see I wasn't going to get anywhere with Chester tonight. Tomorrow, however, would be another story, and I was determined that, by hook or by crook, my friend Bunnicula would eat by sundown the next day. Chapter 8. Disaster in the dining room. I realized that there was nothing I could do for Bunnicula during the day, since he was sleeping, but they gave me time to plan my strategy. At first, I thought I would bring food to his cage, but then it occurred to me that Chester must be taking everything away that was given to him. Pete and Toby usually left the lactose for Bunnicula during the day while he was sleeping, and Chester ever watchful probably nabbed it each evening just before the rabbit worked. No, there would have to be another way. I thought and thought all afternoon, and I could see that Chester had done a good job of isolating Bunnicula from his food. There was no way I could think of to overcome Chester's game plan. As the evening drew closer, and I grew more and more frantic, I stormed into the dining room, and saw the answer to be my problems sitting before me on the table. It was a big bowl of salad. All I had to do was get Bunnicula to the salad, and let him get his fill before the family came in to eat. With that funny white dressing on it, they would never notice if a few vegetables were white. I ran to the hallway to check the clock. 6:15. It would be 15 minutes before the sun went down and Bunnicula woke up. I would then need at least 5 minutes to get him from his cage to the table and feed him. All I had to do was make sure no one came into the room until he had finished. I needed a good 20 minutes at least. I went back into the living room. Chester was asleep in his brown velvet chair, shading in his sleep, still worn out from the previous night activities. I checked upstairs. Toby was reading in his room. The last chapter of Treasure Island, I noted. Pete, who should have been doing his homework, was listening to records on his room. I ran down to the kitchen. "Hello, Harold," Mrs. Murray said as I came through the door. "What's new?" "Other than a rabbit starving in the next room and an imminent attack on your salad bowl, nothing," I thought. I stood at her feet and panted. She scratched my head. This gave me a moment to check out how far she was in her cooking. "Sorry, Harold," she said. "I have to baste this chicken." I noticed the oven timer. Still had 35 minutes to go. It was tight, I thought, but I can make it. Now, where is Mr. Murnau? I went to the front door and whimpered loudly. Mrs. Murnau followed me. "Are you ready for Daddy, Harold? He will be home soon." "Soon is good enough." "How soon?" I whimpered again. "Patience, boy. He's late at a school meeting. He should be here any time." She went back into the kitchen, and I checked the clock. 6:25. It was getting dark, and the Chester was still asleep. Time to swing into action. Having watched the Chester undo the lock on Bunnicula's cage, and having participated in that unfortunate steak episode some days earlier, I knew I would have no problem getting Bunnicula out. I just had to be a little more careful where I positioned my head so that I wouldn't find myself in the humiliating predicament of getting stuck a second time. My timing was perfect. With Bunnicula swinging peacefully from my teeth, I made my way stealthily toward the dining room as the last rays of sunlight gave way to the dark of night. Once inside the dining room door, Bunnicula awakened in great bewilderment. It's not every day, after all, that one finds oneself upon awakening, hanging from the jaws of a fellow creature, even so caring and gentle a creature as myself. Bunnicula opened his eyes wide and turned his face as best as he could to me. I jumped up onto the nearest chair and placed the rabbit safely on the table's edge. "Okay," I whispered. "There's your dinner. Go to it. Get your fill as fast as you can, poor bunny. I'll stand guard." I don't know that Bunnicula fully understood what was going on, but the sight of the vegetables piled high in the center of the table sent him scurrying in their direction. He was very hungry. As luck would have it, and as I should have anticipated, Chester's sense of timing was as stated as my own. No sooner had Bunnicula reached the edge of the salad bowl than the door swung open and Chester bounded into the room. He surveyed the scene frantically. I was unable to act fast enough. Upon seeing Bunnicula about to enjoy his first bit of nourishment in days, Chester leaped across the table, seemingly without touching floor, chairs, or anything else between himself and our furry friend, and landed directly on top of the bunny. No you don't, he shrieked. Bunnicula, not sure what to do, jumped high in the air and landed with a great scattering of greens smack in the center of the salad bowl. Lettuce and tomatoes and carrots and cucumbers went flying all over the table and onto the floor. Chester flattened his ears, wiggled his rear end, and smiled in anticipation. To cat observers, this is known as the attack position. Run, Bunnicula, I shouted. Bunnicula turned in my direction, as if to ask where. Anywhere, I cried, just to get out of his way. Chester sprang. Bunnicula jumped. And in the flash of a second, they had changed the positions. Chester now found himself flat on his back, owing to the sliperiness of the salad dressing in the bowl. And Bunnicula, too dazed to even think about the food now, hovered quivering on the table. Chester was having a great deal of difficulty getting back on his feet. But I knew it was only a matter of a second before he'd attack again. And I knew also that Bunnicula was too petrified to do anything to save himself. So I did the only thing I could. I barked, very loudly and very rapidly. The whole family rushed through the doors. Mr. Murnau must have just come home because his coat was still on. Oh no, cried Mrs. Murnau. That's it, Chester. This is Chester's last stand. Chester rolled his eyes heavenward and didn't even try to move. Mom, said Toby, tugging at his mother's arm. Look at Bunnicula. How did he get out of his cage? He looks scared. Of course he's scared, Mr. Murnau said. We probably forgot to latch his cage and he got out, and I think Chester has been chasing him. Toby put his face close to the rabbit. Mom, doesn't Bunnicula look kind of sick? We'd better take them all to the vet to see if any damage was done, she answered. I started to whimper. No need for me to go to the vet. Mr. Murnau patted my head. We may as well take Harold along, he said. He's probably due for his shot. Mrs. Murnau carefully picked Chester out of the salad bowl and carried him by the scruff of the neck up to the kitchen. I'm going to give Chester a quick bath, she said to Mr. Murnau. Why don't you put together a fresh salad? Toby, you and Peter put Bunnicula back in his cage and then clean up the table. I didn't stick around for an assignment. There was not the time to be in the way. And besides, I now had a whole evening and night ruined worrying about the next morning's visit to the vet. This little effort of mine, I thought, has been a disaster in more ways than one. Chapter 9. All's well that ends well. Almost. Looking back on that night, I remember thinking that this whole mess could never be resolved happily. What would become of Bunnicula, my new friend, who was suffering from the starvation, and what about Chester, my old friend, who seemed to have flipped his lead and, if you will pardon the expression, was in the doghouse with the Murnaus? Of far greater concern at that time, of course, was my own future, for on that night all that consumed my thoughts was the fear of the next day's injections. It all seemed hopeless indeed, but looking back on the next day, I can tell you that happy endings are possible, even in situations as fraught with complications as this one was. Early the next morning, we all piled into the car, some of us with greater reluctance than others, and trundled up to the vet. And by afternoon, we were on our way to solving our problems. The vet worked everything out very nicely. He discovered that Bunnicula was suffering from extreme hunger. I could have told him that. Rather than jar his fragile stomach with solid food, the doctors decided he should be put on a rickety diet until he got better. So Bunnicula was immediately given some carrot juice, which he drank eagerly. After he finished, he looked over at me with a great grin on his face and winked. Chester was diagnosed as being emotionally overwrought. It was suggested that he started sessions with a cat psychiatrist psychiatrists to work out what the doctor called a case of sibling rivalry with Bunnicula. I asked Chester later what a sibling was, but he wasn't speaking to me. So I looked it up. It's like a brother or a sister. And sibling rivalry means you're competing with your brother or sister for attention. I wasn't sure this was Chester's problem, but it sure explained a lot about Toby and Pete. As for me, well, I came out the best. Dr. Wasserman was all set to give me my shot when the nurse came in with my card. Wait, doctor, this dog doesn't need his shot yet. It's too soon. So I got a pat on the head and a doggy pop instead. These days, everything is back to normal in the Murnau household. Almost. Bunnicula liked his liquid diet so much that the Monroes have kept him on it. And oddly enough, there have been no problems with vegetables mysterious turning white since. Chester, of course, insists that this proves his theory. Obviously, Harold, the liquefied vegetables take the place of the vegetable juices, so Bunnicula has no need to go roaming anymore. Then he's not a vampire, I said. Nonsense. He's a vampire all right, but he's a modern vampire. He gets his juices from a blender. Case closed, Sherlock, I queried. Case closed. Oh, Chester. Yes, Harold? What are these two funny marks on your neck? Chester jumped and I laughed. Very funny, he said, as he began to bathe his tail. Very funny. The Monroes never knew anything of Chester's theory. They changed the markets, and to this day believe they were the victims of the curious vegetable blight. Bunnicula and I have become good friends. He still doesn't say anything, but he struggled up next to me by the fireplace and we take long cozy snoozes together. One night, I sang him a lullaby in the obscure dialect of his homeland, and he slept very peacefully. It was that night that cemented our friendship. Now, about Chester. I said everything was back to normal. Almost. Naturally, Chester is the almost. He's been seeing his psychiatrist, the Baruch carts twice a week for some time now. He takes his therapy very seriously. The other morning, I was trying to get a little sleep when Chester came over and nudged me in the ribs. Harold, do you realize we've never really communicated? I mean, really communicated? I opened one eye cautiously. And in order to communicate to Harold, you have to really be in touch with yourself. Are you in touch with yourself, Harold? Can you look yourself in the mirror and say, I know who I am. I am in touch with the meanness that is me, and I can reach out to the you-ness that is you. I closed my eye. I'm used to it by now. He talks like that all the time. He no longer reads Edgar Allan Poe at night. And once he concluded that he had been right about Bunnicula, there has been no more talk about the vampires. The mark of the vampire sets its usefulness obsolete on its shelf. Right now, he's reading Finding Yourself by screaming a lot. And the other night, when I heard the most awful noise coming from the basement, I didn't even bat an eyelid. I knew it was just Chester finding himself, as he calls it. He explained to me that he's getting in touch with his kittenhood, and I've told him that's fine, just to let me know when he's going to do it, so I can be elsewhere. I've had enough trouble from Chester's adventures. So, that's my story. And the story of a mysterious stranger who no longer seems quite so mysterious and who is definitely no longer a stranger. I've presented the fact as clearly as I could, and I leave it to you, dear reader, to draw your own conclusions. I must now bring this narrative to a close, since it is Friday night, Toby's night to stay out late and read, and I can hear the clinking of self-pain. I can only hope it covers 2 chocolate cupcakes with a cream filling. 삼독제 마쳤습니다. 챕터 9까지. 오늘은 조금, 잠이 와서 힘들기는 했는데, 그래도 열심히 읽었습니다. 그래도 하루 만에 일독이 가능하네요. 그죠? 시간을 무조건 낼 수 있다라는 건, 되게 힘든 일인 것 같아요. 근데, 짬짬이 어쨌든 시간을 내면, 저희가 할 수 있는 것들이 많아지는 것 같아요. 저도 참 게을렀었는데, 어쨌든 500번 읽기라는 목표를 세우고, 이게 목표가 워낙 크다 보니까, 어떻게든 해야 된다는 생각을 하게 됐어요. 그러다 보니까, 지금 짬짬이 시간을 내는데, 할 수 있는 것 같아요. 그래서 하루 1독, 또 해야 될 테지만, 이제 할 수 있다면 조금 더 속도를 올려서, 가급적 하루에 2독씩 해볼 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 그래야 500번 읽기가 1년이 넘어가지 않겠죠. 그죠? 최대한 빨리 끝낼 수 있도록 제가 한번 해보겠습니다. 아무튼, 꽤 보람찬 하루인 것 같습니다. 내일 또 4독째 들어가도록 하겠습니다. 여기서 3독 끝.